now.
Hi, everyone. We're pleased and excited to be bringing you the 15th episode of Priestessing the Priestesses, and to welcome today our guest, Xochipala Maes Valdez, and of course, Kohenet Matan and D'vorah Grenn, right here, yours truly. I pulled a card from Rabbi Stephen Fisdell of blessed memory from his wonderful Kabbalah deck just to see what wanted to come up for this session. And it's so perfect, Xochi.
Okay.
For you, I think, because it's Bria, which is the world of creation in the Kabbalistic four worlds. Chochma, he has on here, and that which is wisdom, intellectual world.
Wow. Wow.
And that certainly, on so many levels describes Xochi and her incredible capacities, not only as a priestess of Ifa, but as a graphic designer, a teacher, an educator in many realms, and now mother, grandmother, and herbalist, and many, many other things. I was very excited and fortunate to have her do the graphic design, the creative design, and much input into this anthology, Talking to Goddess, and to contribute some of her very rich poetry and liturgy, Ariki. So welcome, Xochi. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
And good to see you, Annie. And Xochi, we were starting to talk about your practice and how that has changed and what the new considerations are in light of COVID. So I'm just going to let you pick it up from here.
Well, as we were talking before, the tradition I practice, it's an indigenous tradition, and I'm sure it's similar to many earth-centered traditions, but this tradition comes out of the history practices of West Africa, Yoruba-speaking people, and Southwestern Nigeria. And as an indigenous tradition, this tradition, first of all of the knowledge is held orally. I mean, a lot of it's been written recently, but and as an oral tradition and such, it's a very close context, right? Everybody are in relationship to each other, sharing the same space. Rituals are done in shared space. And there's rather a requirement for the energies to be together. That's how you know what needs to happen in a ritual, what energies need to be called down, what kind of healing needs to happen, what kind of information needs to be sought and then deciphered, because it's all there in the space together. And we haven't really been able to do rituals like that, since the beginning. I mean, we went down into safe distancing back in April, maybe March or April. The kids were out of school March 13th, so probably right after that. And so, I mean, lucky enough, I live with people who are practitioners. I have one of my housemates is also a priest, and my partner is a practitioner. So we do what we can with our family, but it's still, not what I'm accustomed to as a priest, of having gatherings where people come, and even working with individual people. Generally people come and they sit on the mat, and we do a reading, a divination reading. And that is something I think you mentioned earlier, that I was teaching some of the philosophy of Ifa, distance learning back in 2004, 2005. And that it was a great medium for teaching, and it is a great medium for doing distant teaching. And it's just not a great medium for doing rituals, for doing healing work, for doing, I would say, even certain kinds of counseling that I was trained in, for sure, in the lineage that I'm in, was very much about healing, particularly focused on women, but all the realms of healing. And I've been doing divination actually for some time, been able to do that, I feel like, in an effective way, by way of Skype. It was first by Skype. First it was by Skype, and then Zoom or FaceTime or whatever the video conferencing platforms have. It gets really tricky when we come to do the rituals, because in our practice, divination is never done just for the sake of understanding, of having information. It's really about moving energy. right? So you do, it's almost like if you go to see the doctor and you get a diagnosis, you don't just walk away and say, well, I just got the information, that's all I want. Well, you actually want to know what to do with this information, and you know, how to get well, or if things are really going well, how to keep them going in that direction, you know, how to manifest what it is that we come here to do in terms of our own destiny. So that's the part that gets really tricky at a distance. And I was talking to D'vorah, it's like, how do we continue to function and fulfill our function as priests, and fulfill our call to minister, to help people heal, to do that ethically? How do we do that at a distance, right? I mean, and I don't know that it's such a different question, like in terms of the medical field, you know, it's sort of like, can you really medically treat someone at a distance? Or are you requiring people to doctor themselves? And what's the ethics behind that? You know, I mean, there's certain training and there's a certain amount of things that, you know, when we do a divination reading, there's always a ton of what I call homework that folks have to do just on their own, you know, to move the energy. And then there's some parts of the work that really require more knowledge. And how do we, you know, I was just asking the question, how do we do that? And then the other thing I think that's big is that when we do these rituals and we have these gatherings that are, you know, more public, or certainly more people, there is a lot of what we call ashe, or energy, that is part of our own self-care too. I mean, we get that energy and we get that too. So with that missing, you know, then it's like we have to generate that part also for ourselves. So that those were just kind of, when thinking about your show and, you know, and what's been coming up for me, I think those are probably the big things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want to say, oh, go ahead, Annie.
Can I ask, Xochi, so what techniques do you think there have been innovations to help address these gaps in the ways that we're being forced to practice at a distance? Especially, I'm really curious about the Ashe, you were just talking about like about needing that energy for ourselves, because
Yes.
when we don't have it, it's not safe to practice. We get depleted. So how are you, and you know, we're priestessing the priestesses, right? Like we're priesting the priests, whatever your, the way you like to use your title. And it just feels really important to address how we are keeping ourselves healthy and safe in our practices.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, I don't know about innovations like if you're talking about in a larger practice, you know, of what's happening out in the community. I mean, I just know that there is a lot of practice that I would say is a little bit skirting on the dangerous area, you know, of trying to, you know, I mean, I kind of think just even in terms of how our readings are really in depth. And for me, what I've kind of made as a practice since I've been doing these at a distance for a while is to, first of all, like create a really big space, a really big room. So someone doesn't call me for a reading and in a half an hour, I'm like, I got to go. Because what happens in our readings is that they sort of bypass all the chatter of whatever you think might be going on, and they go right into the heart of what really is going on. And that can be really it can be really jarring and really decentralizing in a way, you know, throwing people off balance. And I've just seen it happen enough. So I really give a lot of space to kind of unfold what's coming out of the reading in a very kind of slow, methodical way, so that it's sort of being integrated as we're going through the reading, because there's no way for me to then have someone in the room and to be able to know, okay, we need to kind of take care of this right now and do a ritual right now because something has really come up. So what might have taken maybe 45 minutes to do a reading in person, I might leave an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours. I'm on the phone or on Zoom, just to make sure that there's a certain caretaking and enough I guess enough stuff given back so that's like, I always say, like when you go to garden and you pull all the weeds out at once, if you don't put anything in the ground, they're just going to come up. And sometimes more tenacious weeds will come up, or different, harder stuff will come up. So then it's kind of a matter of trying to gauge if something's being pulled out, then what kind of medicine can be given that a person can do to sort of take care of that opening right there, so that, you know, you're not walking out onto the street all wide open and anything wants to come in and fill that up. So there's that piece. And then I think when there's some rituals that are required that come out of the reading, there's a few ways I do. I mean, everything for us, or for me and the way I was trained, we can have an idea about it, like as a priest, and it can be a really great idea, but we check it against, you know, our divination system and our tools. And it's not always sanctioned, even though you may think it's a great idea. So first of all, to see if there is a way to do this at a distance. So sometimes if I'm doing a ritual here, I will have the person set up their whole space and do something, or at least be into a meditation as I'm doing a ritual at home that we can't really do on video. So I'll check in with them before I start, and then, you know, we'll do the ritual and I'll check in with them again, tell them exactly what happened on this end. They tell me what was happening with them while the ritual was happening. So it's almost as if, you know, and I have seen places where people say, well, I'll just do what we call ebo, I'll do the ritual for you. You don't know when they did it, what time they did it, what was happening, you know, and it may be effective and it may not, I just don't know, but that's just not the way I feel, that it's creating safety for the person, you know, and also for me, because we do just open up these energies and they have to sort of be contained in some way. So in terms of the innovation question, is that kind of,
yeah, like how your innovation counts.
Yeah.
This is, you are the person we're speaking to and learning from.
Yeah. And like Debbie was saying, I don't know if this was on when we were talking, but I lived in Toronto about 15 years ago, and I had lived in the Bay Area pretty much for a long time, and all of my practice was based in the Bay Area. So when I went to live in Toronto, I still had a lot of people that I was working with in the Bay Area. So I started to teach some classes online. And that, I think it wasn't really happening that much, this kind of distance priestessing, not in our tradition. So at that point, it's, I think, when I started to really kind of ask the questions and figure out how this might be possible, and, you know, try some things that weren't really high risk in terms of rituals, in terms of readings and that kind of stuff, you know, to build up to see like at what point. And there's still points where I say, I can't do this without you here. So sometimes people will fly out to do the ritual if they're on the East Coast or wherever they are. But there's certain things I just say, we cannot do this not being in the same room. It just requires that. So there have been some things that, you know, have to be put off because of COVID, and that's a tricky one, because if it's a crisis, if it's a critical moment, that stuff has to be dealt with. So I try to explore every single other possibility of how to take care of this issue, even if it means, you know, well, and it never excludes for me in terms of the medicine, like whether someone will get massage or acupuncture or therapy, you know, it's like, it doesn't all have to necessarily come from what we do in our tradition. You know, it's like outsourcing and just figuring out what is going to be the best medicine for a person at any given moment.
Xochi, thank you. Do you want to say a word of just background about the Yoruba and Ifa practice and tradition?
Sure. It's this is a tradition that, you know, it's a tradition. It's an earth-centered tradition. It's not a religion. You know, I mean, you could say it's most akin to like what people might think of as, you know, Native American or Lakota, or, you know, because it's not a religion. It's sort of part and parcel of everyday life. You know, it's understanding of the universe. It's understanding of the world around you and how to utilize the energies that are all around you to come and do what we came here to do, right? So the basic philosophy, underlying philosophy, is that we come having chosen a destiny, like, and that we come many times, and each time we come to learn something different. You know, we're on a long, long journey of our soul. And so the first thing is like, how do we even know what our destiny is? And, you know, that's part of what's built into the community, revealing that to you. So the diviners can tell you what it is that you chose, but you can also know that through your dreams, through your affinities, through your talents. All of those things can point to your destiny. And then it's the job of the community to help you fulfill that destiny. And then it becomes the individual's job to give back their ashe or their talents or their medicine to the community. So it's both highly what we would consider individualistic, like you have a specific destiny and your destiny has to be fulfilled, but it's nowhere separate from the community, because once you have a medicine, then anybody can call you on it and say, I need that. And now you're in service to the community. So like I said, it's an oral tradition, and it's a very, very deeply metaphysical and philosophical tradition. And the oral scriptures contain knowledge, medicine, you know, sociology, psychology, herbs, as well as all of the stories, you know, and the stories of understanding the nature spirits, which we call Orisha. They're the deities, and that's how we get to understand basically the knowledge of the universe is through the natural elements. You know, and then there's the understanding of that, and then there's the ritual practice, which both teaches and stabilizes and readjusts energy so that, you know, there's a balance that we're walking in. Anything you want to add, D'vorah? You know,
no,
a lot about the tradition.
Thank you for that. Well, one thing occurs to me as I listen to you, and that is that when I was in a Yoruba spiritual community, I was in the beginning very interested, and still very much resonate with the ancestor reverence practices.
Yes.
And when I first mentioned it to my family, this was a very foreign idea. But of course, it didn't take me long, a few months, if that, to realize, well, wait a minute, we absolutely have ancestor reverence practices. Yeah. Every time we have the anniversary of someone's death, a yard site, at the high holidays, when we have a particular memorial service dedicated to the ancestors called Yizkor. And the idea of feeding the ancestors, which I still practice, was regarded especially as foreign by my family. My father used to tease me, you know, thinking that I was expecting one of them to come down and actually eat off the altar. And I had to disabuse him of that notion. But so it opened up my research also, because one of the things that I'm very obsessed with in a way, and never have enough time, I think, to dig around. And I will have trouble, I'm sure anyway, finding proof, because we have material culture, but finding evidence of so many practices, you know, is something very difficult, as we all know. But there was food given in the caves of the dead, sometimes in ancient Hebrew practice. So I want to do some more looking into that. But so I, in the beginning, really had to grapple with combining my Yoruba practice with my Jewish practice, which Xochi knows well. And it became very seamless and easy after a time. And both are still part of my practice. Annie, you know this. And so I love hearing you unpack it a bit and explain for the viewers, Xochi, what is at the bottom, what is at the root of it. One other thing occurred to me while you're talking about it as oral tradition, and that is in the Kabbalistic realm, and I've been studying that now for like a blink of an eye, maybe 10 years, if that. But one of the commonalities that struck me is that there are very few texts one can really say are, you know, I mean, there is a text, just as there are one or two in Ifa, but mostly the desire is to not write things down, which I used to find very frustrating in Yoruba, because I wanted to read about it. I was in grad school and that's all I knew, you know, I'd go study this and this. But it's about it's a living tradition, just like Kabbalah. And it relies so much on not only oral transmission, but the interpretation of that. And so I've been very fortunate to learn this from Rabbi Nadia Gross, who got a transmission through her grandmother years ago in Israel, where she was born. So that's a transmission through the mother line about Kabbalah, esoteric teachings, and mysticism. Women weren't allowed to even learn about it at that time. And so that was really part of my entry point. And so they share that in common. And of course, there are other traditions that rely also on oral transmission and don't want to write it down on purpose because it freezes it in time. And
yes, and I think it doesn't give space for, like you said, reinterpreting, you know, and I think one of the problems of that is like it doesn't keep it living, you know, when you talked about it being an oral tradition. And I remember a woman that I knew who was initiated into Ifa, and she actually had lived in Nigeria for quite some time and came back, and then she gathered a bunch of books because there are people who have, you know, put all of the stories and in the different odus and all of that into books and took them back, and she thought it'd be a nice gift for some of the elders that taught her because they, you know, they were just on oral tradition, and they looked at her and they laughed and they said, "You call this knowledge?" And they said, "What do you know of the character of the person who wrote this book?" Because everything about being a priest is sort of like, because the bottom line of our charge, let's just say, as humans in an individual life, and like, you know, like as I said, that long journey we're on is to develop what we call iwa puele, which is gentle character, which is, you know, coming and being here and being in right relationship to all the things that exist. So character is really, really a predominant theme all throughout the metaphysical understanding of what it means to be human. And so you read a book and you don't know the person and you have no relationship to them. And I have to say, we're still reliant on them in this part of the world because we don't have that deep, you know, learning and capacity to call on the elders who have all the oral traditions. So what happens for me is the way I approach that in divination and the stories is that I kind of utilize the stories in the way I would help someone do a dream interpretation. So we see the story as a dream and how does this element relate to you? And I had one time, I remember I had done a divination for somebody who had no knowledge of the tradition, none at all, really didn't do much spiritual practice, somebody I worked with. And she said, "I really need some help. Would you do this for me?" And I read this story, and to me, it was really kind of esoteric and hard to grasp. I said, "Does any of that relate to you?" And she says, "Well, there's a canoe here, and this is," and everything in the story she could pick out for herself and make sense. And so the unpacking of her issue came right out of the story, and it may not have been like the stock interpretation that somebody gave you. Well, this means this, and this means that, and that means that. And that I have found to be very, very, I don't know, it gets closer to the truth when, you know, I'm working with the client, allowing them to relate to the story as something that's coming up out of their own consciousness, because they're there, they've chosen to come here, that story chose to come up. So I do feel like there's a way that they have way more knowledge about that than I do, because it's coming to make a connection with their psyche. But that happens because you understand this is an oral tradition and it's not a fixed definition in terms of what these stories mean when you get an answer in divination.
I really love that this turns, I mean, we don't have really good words for this. I want to say like Western culture, like Western religion, whatever. These are not good words. You know, I'm Jewish and I'm an ordained Kohenet, and Judaism is even though a big piece of the compendium of knowledge in Judaism comes from oral tradition, it got written down and it got fixed. And we still, today, you know, this is part of my personal struggle with this tradition I was raised in, is the ways that it's fixed that are really problematic for our values today. And I struggle with, like, one example that comes up for me when I talk about this issue is the issue of agunot, chained women. So women who aren't able to get out of a marriage because there's this rule that, you know, the man has to give her the get, the release from the marriage, the document. And if he refuses, she's still legally married to him. And there are, you know, in some realms in the Jewish world, there are innovations around this to try and prevent this situation from happening. And in some realms in the Jewish world, they say, well, this is the rule. This is what, you know, can be done. And it's imbalanced because they found loopholes to get the husband out, but not the wife. And the story is still that it can't be done because look, it says here, you know, you can point to this text, it stops. So the living part, and I see it in liturgy and, you know, in the way that traditional, and even to use the word traditional, I feel like the truth of existence has evolved beyond our linguistic capacity in this moment in time. So I apologize for these words that aren't adequate to express what I want to express. And like I hold in me, in my own relationship to the tradition I was raised in, to the religion I was raised in, such discomfort in the wrestling with, well, when we say you have to find evidence for your argument in this text that used to be oral, but then got into, like, that, just that whole tension is so alive for me. And so it feels really, and actually not only in religion, I think also in the way that we value academia as a way of receiving knowledge, books and lectures, and lectures that come from books in a lot of academic settings. And I really resonate with and yearn for more of this narrative, living, character-focused, human, experiential practice and tradition. And for me personally, I don't have enough examples of that in my life. So it feels really beautiful and special and timely to get to meet. For those of you out there, this is my first time meeting Xochi. And so to get to hear your description of your traditions, and it feels like such a possibility model for those of us who weren't raised with those possibilities. Like, imagine if our traditions could be this alive. And I understand that it comes with different complexities, and also it feels so on point for where our world is today.
Right. You know, and just to say that a lot of what you have said is already happening in our tradition, you know, because that things are being written down, and there are lots of things, like even the initiation that I received as an Ifa priest won't be validated in a lot of places because women aren't supposed to receive this initiation. And there are places, like actually when you go to Nigeria, some villages that absolutely feel like it's taboo to initiate a woman, and other places are doing it. And my person who initiated me, my godfather, was from Nigeria. He's from Ile-Ife, and he's like, well, yeah, it just happens. And I met other Ifa priests when I was there, but there are still people like, and then in the diaspora where it comes from, like, you know, in places like you could be in danger, physical danger, if you say that this is what you had, and that people are saying, you know, there's a fair amount of homophobia, like that's, you know, you can go recite this Odu in this place and says this is, you know. And I also feel like we have a lot of overlay. I feel like because there's certainly a lot of people who are coming from Christian backgrounds who are trying to find different ways of expressing, and they're finding these indigenous and maybe ancestral traditions perhaps, and still laying that Christianity right on the top of it. You know, I think it's really hard to break out of that, you know. So you find the misogyny and the homophobia and the transphobia, all of those things are very, very much alive. But I don't feel like that's the essence of Ifa on any level, you know, because it's so flexible, and it's so such an oral tradition. And, you know, even in doing the research and even in finding little things, like maybe something that was written in 1950 and there's a little paragraph and it's like, I've never heard that before anywhere, because it was still preserved in 1950s and somebody wrote about it, and it just opens up the possibility, oh, well, these things were happening, other things were happening that aren't being recorded, because who's recording the history, right? And who's going out as the anthropologist and writing it down for us to call it our history. You know, and one of the things you said about language was really interesting. There's an elder from, not from our tradition, but from West Africa, from Burkina Faso, the Dagara people. And his name's Malidou Masome. I don't know if you're familiar with any of his writing, but he was basically stolen as a child and sent to a Jesuit school, and was abused on a daily basis, sexually abused on a daily basis, and then left when he was a kid and went back and went through initiation that boys go through, that he was much older than the kids he went through, you know, and it's a very, you couldn't maybe not make it out the other end kind of initiation. But then he became, you know, an elder and what we would consider a priest in our tradition. And then he went on to get 2 PhDs. So he has like all of these things together, but he wrote these books, and I saw him when one of the books came out. I think it was called The Healing Wisdom of Africa. And he was talking a little bit about what it was like to write the book. And he was saying, like, there's so much that I couldn't put in the book. He said, first of all, I had to go to my elders and ask them what I could write in the book. And so what I could put in the book was what they let me. And then there's things that just can't really be explained. He said, and then writing the book in English, he said, it's like the Dagara language is, you know, so full of words and ideas that are describing the spiritual realm and spiritual nature. He said, but English, he said, it's like you're at this fantastic banquet table and all you have is the crumbs that fall on the floor, language-wise. So he said, I can't even begin to describe the things in English because there aren't words for that. So when you're talking about the words and the linguistics, I think that's definitely true for what we're dealing with, you know. And so I think for me, what has to happen is that it has to be painted through story and through dance and through some of the drums and all of the ways that kind of don't rely on that very direct, this X means this, you know, A plus B equals C. It's not going to be looking like that, right? It's so much more holistic and so much, like you were talking about, embodied and somewhat experiential. And, you know, again, like I was saying, leaving the time in my readings for that to kind of be able to settle in, that it can't just be explained, you know, in that kind of academic way.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think we're actually, this has been really fulsome, and we're sort of coming to close in terms of time. So is there anything, Xochi, that you feel like I must make sure this happens out loud before we close?
Not that I can think of, no.
How about you, D'vorah?
I just want to say thank you for making the time, Xochi. It is such a rich tradition, and you have, of course, such in-depth knowledge of it, but also your sense of ethics, as you know, is something that I share and always admire in you. And in fact, we're going to be putting a class together, and I'm very excited about
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Because with Iwa Pwele, the gentle character idea, we have Musar, and we have not doing Lashon Hara, speaking ill of anyone, and so on. And so I think there's a lot of overlap there.
Yes, great.
Nice. Where can people find this class?
It will be on my Lilith Institute website once we create it or finish.
That's wonderful.
We've already got a lot
folks,
in our heads. Yeah.
Yes.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
stay tuned. Yeah. Annie,
Thank you. Yeah, just it's really a pleasure to meet you and to get. I understand the limitations of the language, and this is only our first meeting, and I feel like I just got to like peek in a window, and get a little bit of a sense of the tradition that you come from, and the wrestling with how to adapt to the time that we're in. And I really appreciate you bringing that conversation here. I think, as D'vorah mentioned, we haven't really done that here yet, is to talk about like, and how do we priestess in a pandemic? And I really appreciate you sharing your experience of priestessing in a pandemic. Yeah, so thank you.
Well, it was
for
wonderful
being
to
here
meet you too, Annie. I mean, I was looking forward to it. So, and D'vorah, always good to see you.
Thank you.
Great.
Do you want to close us out with a blessing, Annie?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've been really jiving on, I watched a video from Sonia Renee Taylor last night about how when we step into our fullness, our full identities, some people can feel threatened, like there's a scarcity of space for all of us. And she was responding to a comment thread about Elliot Page coming out as trans. And go Google that if you don't know what I'm talking about.
I do know.
Yes, I'm speaking to our audience.
Oh, okay.
And so I really loved Sonia Renee Taylor's language about this expanding into our fullness, and how there's room for all of us to expand into our fullness. And that, yeah, there's no threat to anyone else. All of us in our fullness is the best thing ever, really. Like, this is how this isn't her language now, but, you know, I'm always thinking about how we thrive. And so, you know, my blessing, if I can offer a blessing as we go into I know by the time this is posted, it'll be after the 7th and after the weekend, but we are going into, it's Friday evening or afternoon for us, and is that we take and fill up the space that we need to be our fullest and most whole selves. And that's for all of us and to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Take care.